GM everyone, and welcome back to a weekly episode of We in Web3, a podcast about you, me, Zam, people who are building the future of Web3 and reshaping the way we interact in it in the digital ecosystem, from early developers to newcoming celebrities and advocates. I'm your host, Nikita Tsikaliuk, and as always, we're building the space by people for people. Today, my guest is Kevin Owocki, who is a host of GreenPill, a podcast on Bankless, and also a long-term programmer, hacker who devoted his last 10 years of life to blockchain technology. Kevin, I'm extremely happy to see you on my podcast. Hi, my friend.
Hey, how's it going? Great to be here.
Going amazing. I'll be frank with you. I'm a huge fan of the whole Bankless family, and your podcast is one of those that I'm watching constantly. We're just discussing with you before this episode that your latest episode launched 3 hours ago. Already watched it.
Mhm.
Man, you're crushing it.
Well, thanks for just building a channel for greater combinations of strength and intelligence to come together. I think it was the guests that crushed it, but I was happy to host them.
I mean, it's both guests and the person who is bringing those guests and who is coming up with all these brilliant questions. Kevin, today with you, I would like to discuss your uh, phenomenal Web2 background, transition to Web3, and the space, the ecosystem that you're building with Greenpill, that you're building with other builders and advocates. And I do believe that the best way to start is to actually go back 20, 25 years ago, before the dot-com bubble. I do believe that is a time when you started programming, hacking. Let us know where did you find this motivation and interest in technology, IT itself?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that growing up, my father was a physics professor and a scientist, and I think that that meant that we were one of the first people in the '90s to have a computer that was something that we could use for entertainment or for exploring the world. I think originally we had AOL, the proprietary computer network, and eventually I learned about the World Wide Web and started doing LAN parties. And for me, computers were just an area where there was less constraints on me. You spend a lot of time when you're a kid at school and being told that you have to do homework and that you have to clean up your room, and it was just computers were a place where I could be me and that I could enact agency on the world as opposed to agency or like constraints being applied to me from without. And so it was just a place that I spent a lot of time because it was fun and it was interesting. And I later went on to study computer science because it felt like it was an area where I could continue to enact agency. And the nice thing about technology is that your skills compound over time. When I was just a script kiddie and I was, 14 years old using a computer, I didn't have a lot of skills, but I kept trying and I kept pushing my comfort zone, and that compounds over time. And so, as opposed to your physical muscles, which eventually can only get so big when you work them, your mental muscles can really compound. And I think that in hindsight, that's kind of in the story arc of having a life that has I've grown up while computing has grown up, and that's been kind of cool.
I mean, I really love the comparison of physical and mental muscles here. It seems like your parents were definitely not against you playing computer, you uh, exploring this new technology, and look, you end up doing really well, I should say. Uh, Let us know also where did your interest for hacking come from, and how successful were you, by the way, 20 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I guess like by hacking can mean a lot of different things. That colloquially, hacking can mean like penetrating into computer systems, or it can mean just programming in general. I'm definitely more of just a programmer in general, and I think that for me, hacking in programming was just a way of learning to express myself. and there was fun little side projects that we would do. Like I built a website called on Geo. I don't know if anyone in your audience is old enough to remember GeoCities, but it was a way of hosting a website that was kind of beginner friendly. And I remember having like a page about my music interests, and it wasn't MP3s, but it was whatever the format was before MP3s on it. And so designing web pages and learning to make money online got interesting to me as I think my first job was as a busboy or as a cashier, and I remember making like $7 per hour and just being like, this kind of sucks. Like I don't want to do this the rest of my life. And so that spurred an interest in making money online, which was the end. And then hacking was just kind of like a means to doing that. So designing web pages for people. I later started running internet businesses out of my parents' house. And there's some days when I would make more money online than I would at my 6-hour shift at Superfresh, the cashier, where I was a cashier. So I think that hacking is a means and it's an end in itself, but it's also sometimes a means to other ends. And whether that was expressing myself or later making money, then I think that hacking, you're best at it if you do it for the joy of it, but it can also be a means to other ends.
I love it. And I know from your background that you are successful not only in programming, hacking, as you just described to us, but actually you even launched your VR company some time ago. It wasn't as successful as perhaps you wanted it to be, but at least you tried different aspects of Web2 space. How does early Web 2 space resembles you what we have right now in Web 3?
Yeah, really good question. Um, I mean, I think that I'm the kind of guy who I like throwing spaghetti at the wall, just for the joy of experimentation. As you said, I started a VR company before I started a blockchain company. I actually messed around with AI. Turns out that I don't know enough math to really do a lot of AI stuff. And I've always been a good experimenter. And there's two ways that you can explore a design space. One is empirical, which is by observation, by experience, and then the other way is a priori, which is through theoretical deduction. Or first principles. And so I think that it's the complementary nature between a priori deduction and empirical deduction, which is how you explore a design space, and they both have their own advantages and disadvantages. And empirical observation is easier to do in hindsight because there's actually experiences that you can have. Like we're going to go on Twitter after this and have an empirical experience with Twitter, whereas the future of Web3 social may not exist yet. So you have to talk about it a little bit more a priori. And so, I think that my a priori analysis of Web3, theoretical deduction, or at least first principles deduction, is that we now have actually, I'll phrase it this way. The Internet of Information allowed us to send information across a computer network without an intermediary. And because of that, any random blogger could now have the distribution that the New York Times had. And even now on Twitter, there are people who have more followers than CNN or the New York Times. So this has completely upended everything in society that relies on information, media, news, entertainment, politics. Social media didn't even exist. And now we have the Internet of Finance, and we can send financial information across a computer network. And this was generated by Satoshi Nakamoto solving the Byzantine generals problem. Whenever people think Web3 is not a real thing, I just point them at Byzantine generals problem and the fact that Satoshi solved it with proof of work. I'm like, this is a real punctuated equilibrium and a design space that we're all exploring because of that. So anyway, the fractal of the internet and the internet of money is that now we have value going across the computer network without an intermediary. Is that going to change everything in society that depends on value transfer and scarcity in the same way the internet changed the way information is routed around the world? And so that's my sort of way of framing what the Web3 is going to look like. And I think that the obvious examples are, okay, what relies on value in society? Okay, well, finance, and now we have DeFi, art collecting, and now we have NFTs. And I think that there's underexplored categories like the Internet of Jobs. Like, not I don't think a lot of people are exploring what jobs look like on Web3 yet. And public goods funding. A lot of our value that we get in the world is derived from public goods like clean air and clean water and open source software and journalism and stuff like that. These are what create livable societies. And so those feel like really important design areas to explore. And that's why I'm also like not that good at finance. I didn't study finance. So I was never interested in it at college, and so I think that naturally I've trended more towards the Internet of Jobs. And the last thing I'll say before I volley it back to you is what's most interesting to me is the non-skeuomorphic use cases that happen as a result of this boom. So skeuomorphism just means that the new resembles the old. And the example that I like to use is Yahoo and Google both having the goal of organizing the world's information. And what Yahoo did was they took the library card catalog system, the old way of organizing information, they put it on the internet. So if I wanted to find the Colorado Rockies, which is the baseball team out here where I'm from, I would have to traverse a directory and I would go to sports, baseball, professional, Colorado, and then I'd find the Rockies. Whereas Google just invented a new interface to traverse that information. I would type Colorado Rockies and then I'd be brought to their homepage immediately. And so skeuomorphism is this idea that the old resembles the new. And the exciting stuff in the Web3 boom will be the non-skeuomorphic stuff, the things that don't have an analog mirror before Web3 existed. And that is like my North Star, is to find the non-skeuomorphic stuff, the stuff that's just over the horizon and is going to like change everything. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm always looking for. And there's no formula to finding it. You just have to really live and breathe this stuff in order to be able to see over that horizon. You have to be on that frontier.
I absolutely appreciate you giving such a detailed reply because under one question you managed to give at least three different answers. Web 2, Web 3 transition. What do you like about Web 3? What the future holds? You mentioned the
Yeah.
word jobs in Web 3 on the blockchain, and that is basically the topic of our today
Mm.
conversation. But before we move there, a few more questions from my side to get the audience prepared. You mentioned also the comparison between Google and Yahoo. In
Mm.
short, do you consider Web3 right now in 2022 competition, the space where companies compete, or complementing each other? How do you approach it, and how is it in reality right now?
Um, so do Web3 and Web2 complement each other or conflict with each
No,
other,
no,
I guess is the
exactly.
question.
Web3 ecosystem right now, the companies who
Yeah.
are joining or Web3 native brands, are they competing with each other, or do you see more complementary elements in the space helping each other to grow?
Yeah.
Because one fact that you mentioned is that we're extremely early. We didn't have this boom around NFTs a couple of years ago.
Mm.
People didn't talk about soul-bound tokens, digital identity on-chain, off-chain like years
Yeah.
before. So are we complementing each other right now, or you still see
Yeah.
a huge competition in the space?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is a mixture of both, TLDR, but I mean, I'll explore that and maybe air it out a little bit. I think that one of the areas where I'm really very inspired is the way the consensus clients for the Ethereum 2 network post merge have come together, where basically there are on the order of 4 to 6 consensus clients, Prismatic Labs, Lighthouse, and a handful of others. And what happened was, because Prismatic brand has a ton of traction and they're just great people, most of the network was running Prismatic when the beacon chain first launched. I think 70%. And this is a problem from a network fragility perspective, because if there's a bug in Prism, then basically what happens is that you have the network fork in a direction that has to do with the bug, because that client has a super majority of the network. And so there was this multi-year concerted effort by Superfizz and the ETH staker community to bring client diversity to the forefront and to get other clients lifted up and to push down the prismatic client, which, like, if I was on the Prismatic team, I would see the broader picture strategically, but tactically it would feel like a setback to me that the community was rallying against me. But there's no bad blood there. There's no competitive force there. It's all for the public good of the Ethereum network. And so, I'm really inspired by the need to put the network or the good of the network ahead of your individual. It reminds me of, in places where there's civic pride, there's this saying that we put the good of the country over the good of the party, or over the good of the company. And I think that sense of the greater good is something that's really important if we believe that we're building an anti-competitive ecosystem. And I would really like to see that philosophy extended up the stack. It's just outside of consensus clients, but to NFT marketplaces and to DeFi protocols and public goods fund. Oren McMillan, who runs a CLR fund, and which is another quadratic funding protocol, and I wrote an essay about this called Practical Pluralism, and it's about extending that ethos of decentralization and non-monopolistic behavior up the stack. And I think that practical pluralism is really very cool. But so I think that a certain amount of competitive pressure is healthy, and I think that but what we really want to avoid is monopolistic competitive pressure, where someone gets to be the Microsoft Windows of Web3 and everyone has to depend on their shitty proprietary APIs, as opposed to having the ability to fork the right to exit. And so, at the end of the day, hey, look, we've only got a certain amount of attention. We've only got a certain amount of capital. In some sense, these things do compete. But I think that there's a happy medium between 20% and 50% market share that each Web3 protocol could aim for in order to compete, but and create something that's good, but isn't monopolistic. And I think that a lot of this is enabled by having a shared data layer. Blockchains are shared data layers. And what does supermodularity look like in Web3? So modularity is basically the Unix philosophy. It's this idea that each component does one thing and does it really well, and you can string the components together to create something beautiful and big. And so, like, I'll just take the CLR fund and the Gitcoin example because we're both quadratic funding protocols. CLR fund relies on Bright ID, which is a module for Sybil resistance, digital identity. Gitcoin also relies on Bright ID for Sybil resistance through this module that we've developed called Gitcoin Passport. And so basically, the Gitcoin Grants 2 protocol has an identity protocol, it has a grants registry protocol, and it has a quadratic funding protocol. And same with over on CLR Fund. They've got a grants registry, they use Bright ID for identity, and then they've got a quadratic funding component. And what's really cool to me is, like, instead of looking at CLR Fund and Gitcoin as like these monoliths that have to like compete with each other, we can look at them in a modular way, where, and this is what's cool, is you can build dependencies between the projects. CLR Fund could use Gitcoin Passport for Sybil resistance. Gitcoin could use CLR Fund's Macy quadratic funding protocol and pull that over. So it creates almost like genetic transfer. I don't know if enough biology to know if this is a good metaphor, but like the passing the modules back and forth between the projects becomes really cool. And this is, by the way, modularity is the reason why I think Web3 is going to win. Is like, you can go into a hackathon in a weekend and build something with modules that are off the shelf and open source that it would have taken a bank like $10 million and 1,000 people to do 10 years ago. And it's that super modularity that creates this, like, just this different way of where cooperation is better than competing with each other. And I think that that's the meta in Web3. But so yes, yeah, I mean, the TLDR is that it's a mix between both, but that's kind of like airing it out a little bit.
I mean, the blockchain technology itself is so innovative in a way how you add one layer on the other. The example of hackathons that you just shared with us, MetaMask, Consensus, or any other company sponsoring the hackathon and getting some of the biggest hackers in the space to build some extension for them, to build some new protocol in a matter of 48, 72 hours. That is the beauty of the space, how people are helping each other to achieve this equilibrium in the space, where the advancement of technology meets the needs and wants of the society. And I do
Mhm.
believe that competition is something that is here to stay, regardless whether we're talking about traditional world, Web3, but that is also something that drives the space and makes people think whether something need to be changed and need to be done. But I absolutely enjoyed your reply with all this set of different examples. Kevin, I have been watching you from episode number 18. If I'm not mistaken, it's 40
Uh,
plus episodes now or
the
so.
Green Pill podcast.
Yes,
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
yes. So the question I always had, what is in your room? Can you give us a quick tour around what is on your bag?
Sure.
Because it's some cool art, some cool stuff. Some of it is related to specific projects, some of it is just general stuff.
Yeah.
Just let us know what are some of your favorite things that we can see right now in your background.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to. In this will go out as a video interview, or will there be an audio only audience?
Yeah, this will be as a video. So some things that you have
Okay.
on your back, like for example, two big art pieces, perhaps you
Sure.
can give some backstory of those.
Yeah, happy to. I just wanted to make sure there's no audio only audience that's going to be left out here. This is right behind me a painting that Art by Nelly did, twitter.com/Art by Nelly, this really amazing artist who does Web3 art, in which she basically drew the MetaMask fox with an Ethereum logo in the center of it, and she drove her 5 favorite dApps onto the MetaMask fox, and you can look at it. It's CryptoKitties. I'm trying to do this backwards. Uniswap, OpenSea, Gitcoin, and Decentraland. And at the time, I was still trying to get Gitcoin off the ground, and I was pitching investors and getting rejected a lot. And this is actually the first purchase that I made, was this MetaMask art piece, because it was actually I hung it up on my calls, and I would be on a chit chat with an investor over a Zoom call, and they'd say, "Oh, they asked me about the art," and it was my way of like tricking them into talking about, hey, did you know Gitcoin's one of the top 5 dApps in the ecosystem according to this artist? Like, isn't that crazy? Anyway, so Gitcoin. So it was my way of like tricking them into talking about Gitcoin with me. And it worked because we raised money
I love it.
and eventually moved on. But that was the
What about
first
the
piece that I got.
Phoenix? What about the
That's to the
Phoenix on your left?
yeah. So the Phoenix, and I'll just move my mic so that people can see it a little bit better. Actually, I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to do this, but basically, behind me is Ether's Phoenix, and this is an idea from Carl Flourish of Optimism, of basically how do I explain this? So Roko's Basilisk is this evil AI that will exist in the future, and it's going to punish you if you don't help summon it. So it's basically like an algorithm from the future that if you know about Roko's Basilisk and you don't summon it, then it punishes you when it eventually does get summoned. So it's like this recursive algorithm between like followers and the demon that manifests itself. It's an idea that manifests itself, kind of like how like in Lord of the Rings, Sauron invests itself by like evil powers. And so Ether's Phoenix is the opposite of Roko's Basilisk. It's an angel that rewards you for summoning it. And Carl's whole idea is that Ether's Phoenix is the ultimate manifestation of what Ethereum could be. Ether's Phoenix is an angel that funds public goods, and the way that you summon it is by funding public goods, open source software, climate, things that are good for the earth, and then you will be rewarded for funding public goods in the future. And I don't know if you followed optimism at all, and this just seems like
I
a silly
do.
myth until you realize optimism has this thing called retroactive public goods funding, and they are airdropping in retrospective funding to people who created public goods. And so basically they're using the optimism sequencer fees to manifest this reward for people who are going to fund public goods, which creates this recursive cycle between belief and action and reward that I think is really cool. And so I don't know, it's just like a myth, but it's a cool
I
story
really love
and
it.
piece of art.
I really
Yeah,
love both of these pieces. Are you watching the Rings of Power series right now?
I haven't gotten into it yet, but I've heard good things and I plan to.
It's good. Don't try to somehow make decisions based on the first couple of series. Give it some time, but it's going well because
Okay.
I know that you are a big geeky personality when it comes to all these movies, series, just like me. So you're gonna enjoy it. Actually, you just
Cool.
mentioned ease a couple of times. This beauty I received just a couple of days ago. It's Vitalik's
Nice.
latest book. I don't know if you have read it. I just started earlier today. I
Mm.
absolutely appreciate it, and I absolutely recommend it. And I really appreciate what Vitalik is doing for the space. I met him a
Yep.
couple of months ago at ECC. Had a lovely chat in Paris. I know that David was there as well to interview him
Mm.
for Bankless. I know from one of Bankless podcast episodes that
Mm.
you, Vitalik, David, you'll have at least one thing in common apart from being blockchain savvy is Maxis. You'll play chess.
Okay.
And actually, I have heard from David that you are the real OG in the chess world. So let me know how did you connect with Vitalik before, and why we don't see Vitalik that often coming to your show in comparison to the Bankless
Sure.
main channel, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I think that for chess for me is a way to unwind. I play chess at the end of the day on the internet just to like decompress from work. And I have a little brother who was a college chess champion, was like number 2 in the state of Delaware growing up, and he has recently. I mean, in 2014 he passed, and so for me, it's a way of remembering my brother and kind of like a special way of thinking of him. And
I'm really sad to
so yeah,
hear it, by the way.
yeah, thank you. It is very sad, but yeah, chess is a way to remember him. With respect to Vitalik, I think Vitalik, David, and I were in a chess tournament sponsored by a Crypto for Good project, and I can't remember who benefited from that chess tournament, but I didn't make it very far. I'm only Elo for like 1400, and like Grandmaster is like 2800, so I'm
Good
not
for
that good.
you.
I just like do it to unwind. Um, yeah, I mean, my relationship with Vitalik is that I'm an application developer who's building quadratic funding and on the Ethereum protocol. And there's two sources of connection there. The first is that we're funding public goods in the Ethereum space and built on top of the EVM. And so, as an application developer, we depend on the protocol for that. And the other thing is that Vitalik and Glenn wrote this paper along with someone named Zoe Hitzig about quadratic funding, which is the algorithm that Gitcoin Grants depends on. And I can go into that, but basically, so there's two layers of symbiosis between my work and Vitalik's work. Well, actually three. Gitcoin funds Ethereum public goods. Vitalik is chief scientist at the Ethereum Foundation. Gitcoin is built on top of Ethereum, and Vitalik is the chief scientist at the Ethereum Foundation. And Gitcoin's built on top of quadratic funding, of which Vitalik and Glenn are authors. And so our relationship developed mostly out of those things. And I've been to enough conferences that to see Vitalik get mugged, not
Hmm.
sorry, I said mugged, but I meant mobbed by just people who want to pitch their ICO or things to him. And like for my first 3 years in the space, I don't think Vitalik knew who I was, and it's because I didn't go up to him and like corner him at a conference and tell him about my project. Because that's not my personality, but B, like it just didn't feel like it would leave a good first impression. And what was really cool is when quadratic funding happened, I got a warm intro to him,
Hmm.
and now we're on Telegram DMs together. And yeah, so I mean, it's a symbiotic relationship, but I think there's there's a lot of hero worship that happens from people wanting to take complex technology and just be a fan of someone like Vitalik because he's so smart. And I think that there's a danger that I think Vitalik is great, but I don't think that we should revere him in the way that we would revere like a
Exactly.
company CEO, or like really
Exactly.
Ethereum is great. Like he's building an institution that will that will survive past him. And I think that you have to look at even people who are celebrities like Vitalik and really smart as just like people, and the implication of that is that they have to put their pants on the same way everyone else in the morning, one leg at a time, and
Exactly.
that they're probably flawed people in some way. And so it's a relationship, but it's not something to over optimize for. I'm trying to do as much good as I can for the Gitcoin community and for the Ethereum community, and the relationship with Vitalik is a second order thing from that. And he's been on the
Cool.
GreenPill podcast like once, so I think maybe he'll come back if we have something to share. Maybe when Grants Chew launches or something like that. But
You heard it
but
first
yeah,
here. Yeah.
yeah.
Vitalik is coming
uh,
back.
yeah, I mean, we'll see. It really just depends on what's happening in the ecosystem and what narrative we're interested in getting out there. So, right now,
Lovely.
I'm really interested on the podcast exploring digital identity and collective intelligence, and that's kind of
Hmm.
where we've been riffing. But we'll see
Hmm.
where the next season goes.
Lovely. I'm in amazing relationship with Metis DAO, the company that is
Mm,
run by Vitalik's mother, and that is also the reason how I got to ECC when I was in Paris. So shout out to all my friends there.
nice.
So Vitalik is amazing. Let's not think that he's a god. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. No one knows. But he is a cool
He's definitely
personality
not.
to have in the ecosystem. Exactly.
Yeah.
My friend, the question I have to you is as follows. Why Web3 and the blockchain technology itself is the future of work?
Um, I mean, I guess I would push back and say that I think that it's possible to overgeneralize. Work is a very broad thing. There's proof of work in the Ethereum ecosystem, and that is work. There is what we're doing right now, which is work. There is my software engineering, which is work. There is the people who are repairing a pothole down the street from me, and that is work. And I think that there are sub niches that Ethereum and Web3 will be able to augment and provide a better worker experience to. And there are places that'll take 100 years to happen. And so I guess I would push back on the framing a little bit in that, like, I don't think it's the future of all work, but I think it's the future of
Hmm.
sub work. And so maybe using that framing, we could proceed and talk about areas where it does provide a lot of value.
So what are the areas that you're most bullish on? Is it communication? Is it decision-making power in the organization or something else?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with a pretty simple example. Gitcoin, if you go to gitcoin.co/results, you can see that Gitcoin's funded $69 million worth of software in the space, which is really cool. I'm really proud of that. And one of the niches that we discovered when Gitcoin first launched was that there are people in parts of Africa or parts of Eastern Europe or different parts of the world that don't trust their banks. And so they've never had access to Western work before. And so, like Upwork is this gig platform where you can go and you can sign up and you can get paid $10 an hour to do graphic design or software or whatever. And basically, people who were using Upwork before couldn't trust that payment from the Western vendor was going to actually make it to them when it was going through the traditional banking system. But on Gitcoin, it's just a 15-second Ethereum transaction to get the tokens from my wallet to their wallet, which is really powerful. Because you don't have to like do a bunch of politicking with your bank to get the payment released to you. It's just in your wallet. But B, you're also getting access to a Western unit of account. And, geopolitics is complicated, but one thing I know right now in the year of 2022 is the dollar is pretty strong. And if you're in a place that has inflation of 60 to 100% of your currency, holding DAI is actually pretty compelling as an asset to hold. So that's an example of areas where that I've seen empirically firsthand that Web3 is just having a lot of impact. So I'll pause there, but there's many more examples, but I'll pause there in case you want to riff on that.
I love it. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you that the fact of underdeveloped countries or slightly developed countries where inflation is eating the economy, the fact that people cannot get paid for their work and have this efficient communication with their employees is something that with their employers is something that blockchain solves there. I would like also to know your opinion about the fact of decentralization of the future of work.
Mm.
Perhaps the examples that we just discussed. Do you believe that full decentralization is achievable, or is this mm, dying idea because we still need some party, committee, some organization that will be making this final decision? Because right now, if we take an example of OpenSea, for example, OpenSea is the biggest marketplace for NFTs, digital assets, digital land sale there based on Ethereum standards. And whenever people are talking about decentralization, they want fast payments, they want no control. But whenever there is some kind of problem, everyone is asking for an entity to solve this problem. Everyone is looking for an email to write at, everyone is looking for a specific person to be assigned for customer relationship, refund policies, etc. So it seems like nowadays people who are seeking for full decentralization, they either do not fully understand the space
Mm.
or they have something that we still don't know. For example, Punk 6529, who is building a fully decentralized open source platform, which is the first, in my opinion, the first attempt to get this decentralized world. So what is your take? Should it be fully decentralized or full decentralization is not possible?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a software engineer, and my relationship with tools is, somewhat. I've been trying to refine it over time, and I think you use the right tool for the right job, or the right design methodology for the right job. And decentralization is a tool or a design methodology, and I think that it makes sense when you need credible fairness in an application to make it decentralized. If you need censorship resistance, then I think it makes sense to decentralize things. And then if you've got a concave environment where like the modularity of something can produce more than the sum of its parts, then decentralization makes sense. And by the way, these are not my ideas. I just have a Vitalik post. His most recent post, DAOs are not corporations, where decentralization in an autonomous organization matters. Those are just Vitalik's ideas. I just know about them because I read the post. And so I think that you really want to have decentralization where you need censorship resistance, credible fairness, or you need super modularity. And that's when I would design decentralization in. But there are arguably applications where you don't need those things, and centralization is faster and more efficient. And I think that I'm not dogmatic about decentralization, but I do agree with Vitalik on these three vectors: censorship resistance, credible fairness, and super modular environments.
One of the way how we can truly ensure this fully decentralized, community-driven decision-making mechanism are DAOs. So how do you approach DAOs, and what is the right way to DAO it in the Web3 space?
Yeah. Well, there's no formula. We're in the frontier, and the infrastructure has not been built to DAO it, as you said. And I think that over the next couple years, we'll probably see more advanced playbooks for how to DAO come out. And I think that there's Gnosis Safe. Gitcoin DAO is a compound DAO. Sorry, it's a unifork, and has delegated governance in it. And there's a couple different tools out there that you can leverage to. I mean, this is just the coolest thing about Web3 is that you can just fork another DAO and use their governance mechanism as their own and as your own. And I think that it's that cross pollination that's going to allow the space to traverse the design space a lot faster. But I think that we don't really know the right way to DAO yet. But I mean, I can speak a little bit about Gitcoin's experience becoming a DAO if that's interesting to you.
Yeah, definitely. Let us know in short what was the story behind it.
Yeah. So I mean, okay. So we need decentralization for either credible fairness, censorship resistance, or super modularity. Um, Gitcoin, if it's going to be the public goods funding mechanism for the space, or one of a pluralism of public goods funding mechanisms for the space, it needs credible fairness. You
Hmm.
can't have to worry that like Kevin Owocki's back in the back turning the knobs in favor of his favorite project instead of yours. You need that credible fairness in the protocol. And so unfortunately, I built Gitcoin centralized when we first launched it. Actually, in fact, Gitcoin started off as a bounty platform and later evolved into a grants platform. So just the early, it was like a iterative game to even figure out what Gitcoin was. And this is kind of like the latest iteration is like, oh shit, this thing has to be incredibly fair. It can't be centralized. And so we need to decentralize it. And so in May of 2021, Gitcoin DAO launched and created a governance structure for the Gitcoin DAO. And basically, the fundamental thing that we wanted to do in being involved in the DAO launch was there's this idea in political philosophy that the consent of the governed is the only legitimate basis for governance of a population. It's what legitimizes state power, as opposed to the divine right of kings. And I think that like Facebook and Twitter are kind of like the divine right of kings. Like the shareholders are without question who the management team is optimizing for. They literally have a fiduciary obligation to maximize shareholder value. And so you've got a management team in the center that has their users on one side and has their investors on another, and they're like feeling pulled between them. Wouldn't it be better if the users were the people that were being governed, and then you have this like closed loop of legitimacy? And I think that in Web2 we're all serfs on Zuckerberg's kingdom, and I didn't want to be like Zuck. I didn't want to Zuck it up. And so like removing myself from the governance is eventually progressively was like kind of the idea. So anyway, we launched GTC, which is a governance token that we launched. It was a governance token with no economic value. And basically the idea was to give it to the people who had funded the most public goods on Gitcoin, which creates that legitimacy of the consent of the governed. And there was this roadblock that with DAOs, everyone wants to hold governance tokens, but no one wants to vote. It is like kind of like a cosmic riddle of the Web3 space. And so the way we got around,
I had this issue a couple of times. You need to
yeah,
log in, you need to log in your ledger, you need to actually go there, you need to go through all this proposal and stuff like that. It's cool when
yeah,
it's in a summarized way, and once the decision is made, everyone wants to vote, everyone wants to rule
yeah,
and make the next step for this company or this brand, but no one actually
yeah.
is committed to do it all the time.
Which is hard because that breaks the loop of the consent of the governed, right? You don't really have
Exactly.
consent if you don't have voter turnout. So we solved that with Compound's delegated governance format. And basically the way it works is that when you got the GTC airdrop, you had to select someone who could vote on your behalf. And you could self-delegate if like we made you put, let's say like, this is going to take several hours per month for you to actually vote. Are you sure you want to self-delegate in the flow? And as a result, when the GTC airdrop happened and there was 18,000 GTC tokens, token holders, with it, basically they all delegated their power to people that they trusted to vote on their behalf. And so basically we went from having to try to get 18,000 people to vote on everything to 40 people that were all responsible for managing their own constituents and could vote on everyone's behalf. And so I'm just really proud that Trent Van Epps and Austin Griffith and Linda Z and Lefteris Kapras, like people who are actually Gitcoin community members, were now in charge of delegating Gitcoin, which is what we set out to
Wow.
do. So anyway,
This is the
that
end
was the
goal
first.
here. This is the end goal here to make sure that people who were there from the beginning, people who were developing, they stay, and that you are
Yeah,
giving this decision-making mechanism, a voting power to all the people. I had the chance to share the stage with Nadia Alvarez, who is the head of growth for MakerDAO, the oldest, the biggest DAO out there,
yeah.
back in September at East Warsaw. It was the first edition of East Warsaw. It was a brilliant event. I enjoyed it a lot because Poland is well known for developers, programmers. And one
Mm.
thing that she mentioned during our panel was that we here at MakerDAO were approaching DAOs as an experiment. And me hearing it from her, coming from the biggest, the oldest DAO, and understanding that the whole Web3 space nothing is determined here. You don't know what will be relevant in weeks from now. The companies, remember June, May of this year, the companies were going down like this. The space is
Yeah.
full of rug pulls, the space is full of guessing, blind guessing backed up by some data, by some first experiments. And I do believe that it's still going to take us years, if not tens of years from now, to understand what is this final form. And you giving the example of how your company has been evolving through going through all these cycles, adding new layers, adding new proposals, initiatives brought by people, driven by people. That is a perfect example of how Web3 space should move forward.
Yeah.
So absolutely appreciate you sharing it with us. You mentioned digital identity a couple of times today. That is something that season 2 of GreenPill is focused
Yep.
on. So let me know how big of a role does digital identity on chain has for the future of Web3? Or you believe that digital identity of on off chain, for example, proposed by Evan McMullen from Disco.xyz, is also something that has a chance to be there, be relevant 10 years from now?
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I think before you talk about the what of digital identity, you got to talk about the why. So basically, I believe the Internet of Finance is going to change the way that we transact with each other. And basically, a lot of financial value is transacted in use cases where you need to know the identity or at least aspects of other person's identity before you transact. Like, my perfect example is Uber drivers. I want to know that they're not a creep, that they're going to be safe, and that they're going to get me from A to B like relatively quickly.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, like, maybe I want them to either talk to me or not, depending on how I'm feeling. And so basically, like, that's an example of an economic transaction that's mediated by the identity of each counterparty. Like, likewise, they want to know that I'm gonna like tip them, and like I'm not gonna
It's going
like throw
both
up in the
ways.
car. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. And so that's the why behind digital identities. There's a lot of different use cases in society where just like you're willing to transact with a counterparty that you know X, Y, and Z about, and not one that you think might A, B, or C. And so that's the why. As to your question of on chain or off chain, I think the reason why you would want to go on chain, you would go for convenience, I think, and off chain you would go for consent and for privacy. So what do I mean by that? If I
Exactly.
send you a soulbound token and I say you're an asshole, it's just tagged to your blockchain address forever. That's kind of fucked up. You didn't consent to me doing that. You can't transfer it away. And you know, one of the reasons why Evan's been really pushing on off-chain identity is that it's self-sovereign and privacy preserving. So you can basically reveal what you want or not reveal what you want. And I think that you know, there's valid arguments for convenience and there's valid arguments for sovereignty and privacy. And as you know, I believe that tools, you use the right tool for the job. And so the people should responsibly design privacy preserving, sovereign, consent driven, convenient tools, and we'll get the best of both worlds out of that. And you know, that's how I'd break it down.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Talking about revealing or not revealing, have you ever asked yourself whether I should move forward as an Anon or being fully doxed? Because right now you're fully doxed, you're everywhere. Have you ever asked yourself this question 5, 10 years ago, whether I want to be covered under a PFP or I want to reveal myself, or it was never a question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, I think that there's use cases for being anon, and there's use cases for letting your identity out there. I've always done business under my full name, and you know, hopefully that doesn't come to bite me. I feel like, you know, I'm building for the public good, and my work that like it's none of the work that we do even has custody of user funds ever, and so you know it's just hard for me to imagine a situation in which I fuck someone over um and I'm worried about having my name out there. But And the other thing is like I don't have that much crypto, so there's like really no reason to come after me. But but yeah, I mean, I think that I respect Banteg and I respect a lot of the other great Anons out there who are building, and it's a choice that people make, and I respect the Anons out there, and we'll see how the sort of ecosystem evolves, and maybe people will go from being default docs to being default Anon. I'm not sure how it's going to evolve.
Exactly. My friends from NFT Paris, for example, the conference is going to be held in Paris at the end of this February. They are launching, at least they are believed to launch an option for Anon speakers to come without revealing themselves and feeling yourself
Hmm.
well. I know that there were some attempts by NFT NYC this year, for example, to get some people under the behind the curtain or so. Was not that successful, but still, I do believe, as you just mentioned, that it should be a choice to everyone. That's actually a tweet from yesterday, as they
Hmm.
posted. It's not something that should be dictated by society. Uh, that's something that you should feel yourself comfortable going one way or another. Talking
Yeah.
about digital identity and revealing your identity, what are some of upcoming innovations you're most fascinated about? Is it something related to soulbound tokens that we discussed before today,
Hmm.
or something that hasn't been uh, publicly available yet, but you believe that it's coming in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, um, I think that there's a million ways to take a swing at that question, but the one that I'm most excited about is Sybil resistance, which is basically sock puppet
Hmm.
resistance. And the reason for that is that I founded Gitcoin, which depends on Gitcoin grants, which depends on quadratic funding, which is a way of allocating funds to a crowd in which the number of contributors matters more than the amount funded. And the number of contributors, you have to measure that in a way where people can't make up accounts, and that's the civil resistance problem. um, and so I think that like Gitcoin is a castle in the sky without Sybil resistance. And I didn't choose Sybil resistance as a problem to be interested in. It chose me because of that. And I'm really excited about the work that Gitcoin DAO is doing with Gitcoin Passport, which is a privacy preserving, sovereignty preserving, consent preserving way of creating Sybil resistance on Gitcoin. And it's basically been rewritten from scratch over the last 3 quarters to be a module, to be a decentralized module. And the real upside I see is allowing anyone in the ecosystem to draft off of Gitcoin Sybil resistance, and to basically, like, what if we could go from one token, one vote DAOs to one human, one vote DAOs, or quadratic voting DAOs? The upside of that seems really high to me, because as soon as you go from one token, one vote DAOs, which are plutocratic and optimized for the needs of capital, to one human, one vote DAOs, which optimize for the needs of humans, then basically you open up Web3 from being a playground for the rich and famous to people who are everyday people who don't have a lot of money. And so I think that there's a lot of upside for Web3 in making the transition of allowing civil resistance, but it has to be done in a privacy preserving, consent preserving, sovereignty preserving kind of way. And so that's kind of the intersection of my work and the broader thesis around digital identity. If you listen to GreenPill, you'll note that a lot of the guests talk about civil resistance, and so that's kind of traversing the design space. It's been a lot of fun to explore that.
If there is one thing that I understood from you during this episode is that you are actually a person who is testing the water. You're the person who won't be just learning the space through theory, which you're also doing and doing really successfully through Green Pill podcast, through being connected with all these people. But you coming from this programming background, wanting to reverse everything, wanted to build everything from scratch and see how it's going to work if you change one or two elements, you're experimenting in this space. And I truly appreciate that. And today's episode has been full of value, full of educational content. I do believe that if someone takes some time to cut all these smaller clips of you sharing some alpha of you giving some real world examples, post those on Twitter or YouTube, you're definitely going to be in trends in a matter of days. I would absolutely love to see you at V in Web3 later next year. If it happens, if you come back, and you're always welcome, my friend, what would be one question you would love to ask yourself, let's say in half a year from now? One question to make sure that you succeeded in this space, that you're happy enough with what you're doing. What would be this one question coming back to my podcast in half a year from now you would ask yourself?
Yeah. I think that in a year or so, I would love to just see a progression of the themes that I've been working on. When digital identity, when collective intelligence, when are we going to be able to resource the commons with Web3? Have we made progress, or are we regressing into the needs of capital and just the needs of greed? And is Web3 becoming more social? Or is it not? Actually, maybe one way to frame all these questions is I wrote this book called GreenPilled: How Crypto Could Regenerate the World. This is the book. You can get it at greenpill.party. And so the subtitle is How Crypto Could Regenerate the World. And so is crypto regenerating the world yet, is the question in a year. And what I really want to do is write the book How Crypto is Regenerating the World in a couple of years time. So if you invite me back in a year or so and it is, then I think that'll be a good place to be.
This is an amazing question to have in a year from now. Actually, I was going through your webpage where you can find all the information about Kevin's public appearances, being on media, on the stage, and you had a bucket list of yours, and one of those points was to write a book, and it's still in the bucket list. I do believe it's already done. You can move forward from there, Kevin.
Yeah, totally. I've it's been really fun to learn how to self-publish and to get ideas out there. And the book is a means to an end to educating people about this stuff. So,
Love it.
yeah, pick up a copy at greenpill.party.
Kevin, I have a small tradition on my podcast. At the end of each episode, I'm asking my guests to imagine a situation, which is called elevator pitch. So, right now, I would like you to imagine a situation where you're stuck in an elevator. You have about 15 to 20 seconds till you reach your floor, and in front of you is standing someone who you strongly want to get into Web3. The day is today. That is the current October of 2022, the current state of the market. You need to make sure in this 15 to 20 seconds that you get this person interested in different aspects of Web3 and make them believe that Web3 is the future of entertainment, communication, payment, digital identity. So let us know what would be this elevator pitch of yours.
Oh man, this is my Achilles heel is being concise and getting things out in 20 seconds.
You
But
got
I think it really
25
depends
seconds. Go on.
Okay. I think it really depends on who it is. So who I want to bring into the Web3 space. Well, there's this guy Daniel Schmachtenberger that I've been working really hard to bring into Web3. He's a philosopher who thinks a lot about existential risk to humanity, and basically he has this theory of the meta crisis, which is basically we have coordination failures like climate change and nuclear proliferation, which like no one of us chooses to have that be true. And like the way that you solve that is you have regulation, but like who watches the Watchmen is kind of the question with regulation. Is like, how do you prevent that being an authoritarian regulatory regime? How do you make it have that feedback loop of the consent of the governed? And so that's the meta crisis, is being stuck between catastrophes, which is coordination failures, and dystopias, which is authoritarian regimes. And we're looking for a third way, a third attractor that solves coordination failures but doesn't have the authoritarian dystopias. Okay, so that's the setup. I'm in an elevator for Daniel Schmachtenberger, or with Daniel Schmachtenberger, who has this thesis, and I think what I would say to him is like, hey, Ethereum and Web3 is the third attractor. We can solve coordination failures but without centralizing power. Shit, with that setup, with a minute long setup, I'm able to do it in like 5 or 10 seconds.
5 seconds, exactly. It was short, it was concise, it was stick to the point. Kevin, I absolutely appreciate you coming to another episode of We in Web3. You are full of knowledge. You are a true visionary in the space from both technical side of it, visionary from the way of what needs for all of us right now and how Web3 can bring it. And I absolutely loved connecting with you, having you on the podcast today. I really hope that you're going to come later next year to, first of all, answer your question. And secondly, to make sure that you brought tens of friends of yours to the Web3 space with this 5-second elevator pitch. So thank you very much for coming today. You are a real rock star of Web3, my friend.
Thank you so much for saying that. Thanks for having me. And yeah, happy to return in a year. But it's up to the audience and the whole ecosystem to make sure that crypto is regenerating the world. So that I'll be able to answer that question, yes, in a year or two.
Exactly. My friend, thank you very much and have a lovely day ahead.
Likewise.